Like the aesthetic of it. I like the bold fonts and the subtitle. My question is, does it speak? Do you have a clear understanding of who your reader is, your niche, that sort of thing? And does it speak to that audience so that they understand what they're going to get from this book?
From what you've seen, what is the most challenging part? Like, where do people get stuck the most? So I got Tim here from Tellwell Publishing. We're here on my video series called How to Avoid the Annual Crisis. The annual crisis is the process of creating and producing digital or creating annual reports and all the challenges that come along with them. So Tim's here today to talk about storytelling, publishing, editing, writing. So basically everything on the production side of things. So Tim, over to you for a brief intro on kind of who you are, what your story is, and then we can talk about maybe the book you're working on and the publishing process.
Thanks for having me, Patrick. And Tellwell basically works with authors, and we help them through the self-publishing process, providing guidance, but also some publishing talent. And we help them write, publish, and promote books. And we've worked with over 4,000 authors across many genres, some of whom have very inspirational stories, and some have gone on to start their own nonprofits. And they have tied their book to their nonprofit, or they've used storytelling as part of promoting their book for a number of reasons, and we can get into that. But certainly I believe in the power of stories, and we work with those every day, both people telling stories through their book, through promoting their book, and often through the purpose that drives them. And that's where there's a big overlap with nonprofits, I think, is people who have a purpose and want to have impact, and how they can leverage a book to do that, and how they can leverage stories within the book and as a method of promoting the book, and as a message of having impact overall in other mediums, such as speaking or presentations and so on. So I really believe in the power of stories for nonprofits, and I'm looking forward to talking more about that.
Perfect. So I know that you're working on your own book. So what are you working on right now?
Sure. And when I started the business, really what pushed me into it was writing a book as well related to publishing. But now, almost 10 years later, I'm finally getting my hands dirty again. And the book that I've written in draft form with a lot of help is about the process of going from purpose to impact, using a book to do that. So there's basically 4 steps to publishing a book. You plan, write, publish, promote, but you can break it down further to 10 steps. And the first step is getting clear on your purpose and goals. And the last step is really having impact. And then there's a lot of pieces in the middle on this difficult journey. But that's what the book is about.
And so what are the 10 steps? Like, are you able to share or share some of them?
Sure. Yeah, so like I said, it's plan, write, publish, promote. If you look at just that first step of planning, there's 4 pieces to it. 1 is getting clear on your purpose. 2 is getting clear on who the reader is. 3 is actually defining your product or your book idea. And a big part of that is crafting an outline. And the 4th one is having a simple 1-page plan so that you believe that this is possible. It's demystified. So after that, you've got write and revise the manuscript. The first version is never good, but you have to accept that. Then you've got editing it through multiple types of editing. And then you have designing it, distributing it, and promoting it, and having impact. And of course, I'd love to nerd out on all the details there. But when it comes to purpose, there's different ways of you can look at purpose. One is about the reader and the impact you want to have. For a nonprofit, that could relate to the beneficiaries of the nonprofit. Another type of purpose is sort of for the organization or the individual. And that can be things like creating credibility and authority, or getting visibility and media, or being a hook for doing public speaking, And you can see how these all tie towards, well, doing a book is one thing, but that's just one way of getting a message out. And other ways of getting the message can be promoting a book or doing public speaking. And then there's a third type of purpose, which is about the intangible or intrinsic rewards of doing it. And that can be things like personal growth, learning new skills, and connecting with people, building relationships, which are really enjoyable in their own right. And so those are the 10 steps: purpose, reader, product, plan, edit, design, distribute, promote, and ultimately tying it back together and having impact in multiple ways.
And what about step 11? So after it's published, the promotion, the marketing piece, right? Like obviously, if you go through the 10 steps and you publish, now you have to do something with it, right?
Well, sure. And you can write and not publish, and that can still have value to yourself. Writing a journal, writing for healing. There's sometimes a healing draft where you write it, it has its own value, but you don't need to publish all that. That's where you have to define your reader and say, well, what does the reader actually need? And the reader can be a primary reader. You might have secondary readers, but you can write a book and then design it and publish it. It's available for sale. It's out there on Amazon. That is a huge milestone and something we're celebrating, and a part of a journey that's very exciting. And hopefully you've learned a lot up to that stage, but you haven't really had impact at that stage. Well, you have had impact on yourself and maybe on others you've worked with and some of the steps along the way. But it's sort of like a tree falls in a forest. Does it make a sound? Really, that's when that next journey, the journey of writing a book is a journey. The journey of publishing it is a journey. And then that's where the real work begins. But then you have to actually promote the book. And that's where you get to a lot of the impact you can have with a book. And again, there's nothing wrong with being afraid of that, being scared of doing that, not knowing what to do, being a little lost. But recognize that's a difficult part of the journey that you have to engage in, and you have to find a way that's authentic to you. You might even have to develop new skills that you don't have to do it. And again, those can all be valuable skills if you learn how to do it. So once you've published a book, the process of promoting it can go on for years. We had an author, after 5 years, she just kind of updated her book and she still uses it. She talks to municipalities about civic engagement and civic governance, and the book is there 5 years later. She still uses it as a hook when she's talking to people or doing workshops or doing speaking. So the act of promoting a book is an end in itself, not just to sell books, but it's a way of creating awareness in its own right. So there's different ways of promoting a book. You can first control your message, craft your message, look at all the places where you can tell your story and leverage those the best you can. And then you can, of course, do earned media through podcasts and so on. And again, every time you tell your story, it's not just to promote a book, it's another way of telling a story. And a book helps you do those interviews. A book helps you do that public speaking if you want to do it. So when does the promoting effort ever end? That's kind of a neat question. It really gets back to the purpose and the impact, and you evaluating whether you do another book, whether you are doing other priorities in your life. You have to weigh the various options. It could be that your book becomes a smaller piece, but it's still there. And then you're evaluating that. And that gets back to sort of the first few steps of like why you're going to publish a book in the first place. You have to evaluate all the different books you could do, or all the different non-books you could do, and decide, well, this is the book that would have the most impact in my life, in my purpose, in the impact that I want to have. And so you're making that evaluation. So I think your question about, okay, what about step 11? You've done all this work deciding to do this book, creating it, making it professional, and then talking about it and having an impact. Well, what next? There's a certain point where you one, enjoy the impact that you're having, or two, revisit either upping your game on learning new skills on marketing, doing another book, or not doing another book and doing other priorities in your life.
Yeah, so when writing a book, clearly there's like many different jobs, right? There's the strategic part of it, there's the creative of the writing, there's the editing, which is its own role, and the publishing, which is another piece, and then the marketing. So like someone has to wear, if they want to do it all themselves, they have to wear a ton of hats. Right. So what in your kind of what from what you've seen, what is the most challenging part? Like, where do people get stuck the most?
That's a tough one, because there's a lot of places to get stuck. There's so many places to get stuck. I think that's one of the reasons people work with someone like ourselves, to kind of help them get unstuck at various steps along the way. Probably the biggest place people get stuck is at the very beginning of having an idea, wanting to do a book, sort of having a sense of what the goals or purpose of the book could be in their life, or the impact they want to have. And then that's where they get stuck, is they aren't quite clear if it's possible. They don't understand the barriers that have been removed in modern day publishing. So it's very much doable. Doing it well takes a lot of work. There's a lot of places to get stuck, but I think the biggest place people get stuck is actually at the very beginning, where they want to do a book, and then there's so many small little barriers that all can be removed with the right encouragement and support. But people get stuck. The number of people who want to do a book at some point in their life is not everybody, but very close to that. The number of people who actually get through writing a draft is maybe 3%, something like that, or less. And then the people who finish a draft who actually publish it is, again, much smaller than that. So the vast majority of people get stuck before they ever finish a first draft. And they get stuck because they don't know how to create a writing habit. They don't know how to fit it in their life. They have a bunch of mindset issues. I don't know enough. I'm not a writer. I'm not an expert enough. Imposter syndrome, all these different things where they think they have to be something that's out of people's reach, and they don't realize that actually you don't need all of that. And there is a role that a book can play, and you can get through the step. You don't need, this is a common one, well, I need to not have a job, not have a family, have a place on an island where then I can write my book at some point in the future. That's never going to happen for anybody, and people often think that, but actually, I've just written this book in the last year, having kids, spending lots of time with my kids and family, having a business, running a business. But once I got over that, I was able to find the little bits and pieces of time, and you can actually calculate it out, how long you have to have a writing habit to get it done. And of course, once you are clear on your purpose and you have a nice outline and you have a plan, and you understand that, it is possible through various types of publishing, one way or another, there's an option to publish it, then you have a lot more motivation. And if you've addressed those mindset issues, then you can get going. And it will probably take longer than you expect, but
everything does.
Everything does.
Yeah, I know from my journey, I first started writing my book. It was 10 years before I published it. And the reason was, so what happened, Tim, was I wrote the book, and I was doing how to basically be awesome at web design, right? And so I had 100 pages in a Word doc of these little kind of little bits of articles and everything someone would need to know. And then I went to edit it, and I was like, holy shit, this is boring. And it was like, the editing process for me was like, no, like I don't like, and then I'm like, I had to come up with like illustrations or graphics to make it interesting. And then I was like, who really wants to read this, right? So then I just kind of put it on the shelf. It's still probably laying around the office somewhere, this like big manuscript, right? And then when I had my son and we were reading kid books all the time, I was like, I'm going to take what I did and convert it into like a kid style book that's, like more manageable for us to, for me to actually write and take it down. And even that took, a significant part of time. And now I've got, the sequel that's, it's like 95% of the way there. I just need to do the final edits and review. And it's like, being a creative for me, the creative part is, the easy part. Yeah. It's knowing, when to stop and then how to get the final details done. And then when I first heard of Tellwell, it was because it was, how am I going to publish this thing? I created something or I'm about to create something and I'm going to get it finished. Now what, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think like for me, like the obvious thing was, well, Amazon, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because you see Amazon books, but then you're like, what does it mean to use Amazon? Am I tied just to their their network and their platform? What if I want to do it outside of their platform?
Mm-hmm.
What does that mean? What does that look like? What about like Indigo in Canada, or Barnes and Noble,
Mm-hmm.
or other kind of networks, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think like when we're looking at like publishing, what like so like, I guess the question is like, why not Amazon, or why Amazon? Why not Amazon? I guess. And
Yes.
then like what does that the steps look like to actually like once you do all this work and you get your story done, you get it edited, how do you actually get it published?
Sure. And I'll just touch on, you talked, first of all, good for you for actually finishing that first draft, even if when you looked at it later, you thought it lacked, I don't know, you lacked something. When we talk about outlining, we talk about it in multiple dimensions. The first dimension is like the fundamentals, the lecture of your content. But then another dimension is the stories, the pictures, the activities, the how-to, bringing the content to life with in a way that includes stories. Again, can be part of that dimension. And a lot of that, if you don't include it very much in the first draft, it can be added in the revision process, sort of like you did. Now, on the question of why not just Amazon, Amazon is great. Whatever you think of Amazon, they've had negative impacts, they've had positive impacts. But one of the pieces that happened historically is in the 90s, there was the democratization of publishing. In the old days, there was only one model of publishing. You had to get an agent, and then a publisher, and then a distributor, and then a bookstore, and then media, and then you had permission to publish in a sense. What happened in the 90s was print on demand, ebooks, and well, print on demand and e-commerce. So Amazon really was part of the revolution of publishing. So publishing on Amazon is great, but that's just one piece of the publishing process. So you can publish for free in a certain sense, but when people say that, they're often talking about one little piece of publishing, which is making a book available on Amazon. And it's actually great that there are do-it-yourself options for publishing, and that might be the best option for many people or some people. But it's the best option for people who are really technically savvy, have lots of time on their hand. They want to manage every detail. The downsides are, one, there's a lot to learn. Two, that's going to take a lot of time. Three, there can be a lot of headaches along the way. And four, perhaps most obviously, is quality. If you're doing everything yourself, unless you're a very multi-talented person, which some people might be natural editors and designers and so on, but I can't really say that because even the best writers in the world, they know that they can't edit their own manuscript. But of course, if you can't afford to hire an editor, you have to make it, you can try to do what you can. So it's great to have a do-it-yourself option there. But that's not publishing, the whole piece of publishing. Publishing includes both, editing, design, marketing. And so a lot of people don't want to go the cheapest route. They want some level of professional expertise for quality because they're putting all this effort and time and their heart and soul into a book. They want it to be the best version that they can make it, and they realize that they need some help with that. At the very least, some editing help, and at the very least, some help with making their cover look professional. But then in addition to that, a lot of people just want someone in their corner helping with support, encouragement, quality control steps. And so that's why there's different approaches to self-publishing. Traditional publishing, you can try to work with a big publisher if you fit that their selection criteria, which is a very small percentage. There's small publishers who might be more accessible, but again, might not add that much. The reason people self-publish nowadays is there's so many advantages to it. They're in control of the timeline, in control of creative control. They're keeping rights to their book. They're earning 5 to 10 times higher royalties. So when they compare that to traditional publishing, a lot more people don't even want to go through all the hoops and put all their time and effort into soliciting agents and so on. So a lot of people go straight to self-publishing, but then there's multiple avenues of self-publishing. Hardcore do-it-yourself, where you have to literally try to figure out how to format your book, again, which is all technically doable. It just takes a lot of time and expertise. Or you can go approach to self-publishing where it involves getting more help from professionals. You have to invest in that, just like you are a publisher, and just like a publisher would invest in that, investing in quality. And then there's approaches that are more, the author takes on a heavy project management role and still self-publishes by hiring freelancers. Or if they know they don't really want to, or they're not ready to be that project manager, they might work with a company such as ourselves, which sort of has a proven process for bringing a lot of the pieces together. And we, in our case, will customize it based on your needs and so on. But our model can be really good. But again, there's a lot of companies that try to do what we do, and you kind of have to do your due diligence, because a lot of companies, they just don't do a good enough job. So you have to do your due diligence, like with looking at any other service.
No, that makes sense. And when it comes to like the design of the cover, how important is it? Like, I'd imagine that that's probably like one of the most important things, right? Because you have to kind of hook them in, and then you have to tell a good story.
Yeah, the cover, and realize the cover includes the front, the spine, and the back. And so the cover also includes the title and the subtitle. So it depends what type of a book you're doing and the genre of book you're doing, but the cover has an incredible amount of impact in itself. And it's kind of the piece that should, once people see your book or they're brought into contact with it, that it really captures their attention. And then when they read the back cover, and the back cover can be what's on the printed version of the book, but a lot of people are looking at a back cover that's an online version. So that's the Amazon profile page.
Right.
And there's a lot you can do with the Amazon profile page. You can have a longer version of your back cover that could be more like, contain more information. But then there's a lot of pieces of your Amazon profile that you can control, where you can have nice fancy images. You can turn it into a real piece of collateral that shares your message, gets people's attention, and helps them move them along to actually buying the book. So the value of the cover is for people who see it, that they actually follow through and take some form of action. And the cover can have an impact in itself based on your goals. Even if they don't necessarily buy the book or read the book, the cover, the back cover, your profile, that can actually have its own impact. So it's very important.
Here, let's try something. Here, I got my book here. Tell me, what do you think of my cover?
Website Survival Guide, Steve's Magical Adventure. I think it's good in that you can see clearly what it's about. The question is, who is it for?
Right.
And why would they need it? That's my first sense. Is I like the aesthetic of it. I like the bold fonts and the subtitle. My question is, does it speak? Do you have a clear understanding of who your reader is, your niche, that sort of thing? And does it speak to that audience so that they understand what they're going to get from this book? But show me it again, the front. Website Survival Guide, Steve's Magical Adventure. Oh, that's interesting. And so what type of a book?
So it's all illustrated.
Oh.
And it's all basically like web design best practices.
Oh, very cool.
See, like,
and who is the audience for it?
It's my client. That's really, at the end of the day, it's me explaining things to my client, right? And so like the purpose of this was really for myself at the end of the day, right? Was like, I want to actually get this book done and published, and what's going to make me the happiest. And then the side benefit is I can give it to my clients, and they basically, it explains things in a way that's interesting, right? So my story is my character going. So Steve he's a coconut issue, so he gets hit in the head by a coconut. Let's see. Let me see if I can find the page here. So he's down in the forest. He gets stuck, hit in the head by a coconut, and then he sees the Sasquatch there. And then the Sasquatch goes through the adventure and learns all the tips and tricks and best practices. And then at the end, he turns back to Steve. And then the sequel that I'm working on is Steve's Fantastic Vacation. Yeah. So on that one, then he's going on a boat and the sign's broken, and he gets on the wrong boat and he's on a pirate ship, gets hit in the head by another coconut, and then there's like another adventure that ensues, right? So, it's really just, I'm just trying to have a good time and explain the principles, right? So it's like a kid's book, but it's meant for like me, like a marketing comms person, or even like a kid, maybe like an older kid that's like interested in it and wants like learn the topics and best practices in an engaging way.
That's great. It's a lot of some business coaches or consultants and coaches, they'll do a fable. Some of the most best-selling books in the space and the biggest coaching networks, they'll have a fable, right? With Traction or EOS, they have a fable version of it where or the 5 dysfunctions of a team, they'll do a fable, which is really a story, because people just can't focus on boring text. So they turn it into a story, and they tell all the concepts and the knowledge and the lessons in a story format. And it's just easier for people to digest, because even if we're adults, we need something to keep us engaged. So I love that idea of taking it almost in kids book format, but you're doing it as in an entertaining, engaging, kids-like format, because we are all kids in a certain sense, in that we like stories, we like visuals. And so if it's for clients, that could be very useful. And it's for there might be another book that, there's how many books about website design on the market, but yours is very unique to your goals and your purpose and your clients. So that's a really neat concept.
Yeah, no, thanks. So one thing that I was on actually a webinar recently, and it was basically like how to be a bestseller, right? Because I'd imagine that a lot of people probably just write a book and they're like, I'm going to be a bestseller. And it was interesting because the guy that was running it is the best, New York Times bestseller. And basically he was saying that, basically what he does is he does like schedules the release of the book. And then he probably has like 3 or 4 assistants that go to all these communities online and says basically trade review for review, right? So, give me, I need 10,000 5-star reviews on Amazon. And so basically his whole approach is just getting those 5-star reviews, which then puts them on top of Amazon. And then from there, when someone's going to look at a book, they're going to choose the one that has the most 5-star reviews. If someone, were to say, I want to be a bestseller, like what advice do you give for someone to try to, market and get the book out there to the masses?
Yeah, there's a few things. One is, what do you mean by bestseller? Because bestseller can be in a certain category on Amazon. So it's a lot easier to be an Amazon bestseller in a certain category. And that can actually be a useful marketing piece, even though it's not the same thing as the New York Times bestseller. As regards being a New York Times bestseller, nothing wrong with shooting for the stars. Just recognize you've got a lot of competition, millions of other books. And so the question I would ask would be, well, what are your other goals related to the book? And is there a more easily achieved version of that goal that you can achieve? And for example, a lot of people want to sell a lot of books, but why do you want to sell a lot of books? Is it to have a greater impact or to get more visibility? And often there's a version of that goal that's easier to achieve that still has a very big impact. So you might not get on Oprah, which would be a good way to get to the New York Times bestseller, but are you sure you're ready for that, or that you've really earned that yet? Is that where you're at on your journey? Maybe what you can do though is you can get on podcasts. You can definitely build your profile. You can work your way up from there. So I think you have to be careful with setting expectations. Certainly in the business we're in, we don't want to be over promising or promising more than we can deliver. It's not within our power to put people on the New York Times bestseller list. So I think it comes back to thinking about the various ways that you get value from this book project and who you're trying to help, who your audience are. So if it's a nonprofit, it might be the beneficiaries. It could be a book about, you know, helping people cope while they go through a certain challenge. We've done a lot of very powerful books about people who have been refugees and the experience they've gone through, and they've used that book to create awareness about what it's like being a refugee or an asylum seeker, but also then they end up doing public speaking on that. They do speaking at organizations. They do all these other activities that can have an impact, and they grow from there. If you want to be on the New York Times bestseller to make money from selling your book, well, there's lots of ways to make money from a book. Selling books is not the best one. A lot of people use a book more as a marketing tool, just like a nonprofit might, to create awareness, create credibility, and then to combine that with a lot of other things like media, like speaking, like workshops, potentially even paid courses or other work that ties in with the book, but is not just selling the book alone. So we have to be careful about promising something we can't, but there's a lot you can achieve that is very achievable, and a lot of value people can get from that in terms of the impact they're having.
That makes sense. I think it all comes down to like the long-term strategy, right?
Yeah.
You're not going to, you know, regardless, you're not going to be a bestseller in one day.
Yes.
Know, unless you have a whole team that's, you know, like working towards that.
Yes. And certainly, like I said, crafting your message and your story and all the places you control that is important, just including the cover of the book, the Amazon page, your various profiles, you know, a 2-page marketing collateral or a media kit, a website. Reviews, you just touched on that. Reviews is important. You have to be careful, because if you break the Amazon rules on reviews, you can get all your reviews removed and everyone who reviews you. So you have, but there's tactics you can do to actually launch your book well and generate reviews, and that is important for when people think about buying your book or another book. It is important to have those reviews. You can try advertising for some types of books. It can work, especially if your model includes more than just selling the book. And then of course there's all sorts of earned media, and then there's things like public speaking or doing webinars or doing a number of other advanced marketing tactics, but it doesn't happen without any work. You both need a great idea, a great product, you know, an effective job of promoting it, and so on. And so there's a lot of pieces that have to come together to be on the very top lists of bestseller lists, but there's often very worthy goals that can be stepping stones.
So when it comes to like, so you just touched on book launch. So what does a successful book launch look like? Like what's part of that?
Well, a book launch is in a sense special, but it's also in a sense just part of the ongoing effort of promoting your book. It just happens to be the first piece of it. So you can have a launch. You can do certain things like having a 99-cent sale and promotion. In some sense, you want to just celebrate it for yourself. So it's like, are you going to do a local book launch where you announce it, invite everyone to come? You might want to do that just for yourself, to kind of honor the work that's gone into it, both on your own part and other people who've worked on your book. You can be doing some of your outreach in the 3-month period before you launch the book. So you can start promotional activities in advance of releasing it. You can start to build an email list. You can choose to do beta reading, which those beta readers, in some cases, you can also try to use them as book reviewers. But really the launch is, and of course some people do big, gigantic launches. Often they're people who have a lot of resources already that they're putting towards that. So I don't think that everyone needs to aspire to have the same launch as someone with an incredible amount of resources. So in a sense, a launch is important, but it's really just, in time, it's the part that's at the beginning of promoting your book. So you can take all the activities you do to promote your book and put some of those actually before the launch. And then tactically, you may decide if you want to do something like, have a free promotion where you give the book away for free. Again, that works more if you're using the book for reasons other than to generate royalties. You can do a 99-cent promotion. You can do events in person or online. You can begin tactics like podcast tours. But again, that's really the same things you do where there's no defined time period where you have to stop doing those things. It's just the things that happen to lead up to the launch of your book. But I think it's important to give yourself a pat on the back when you get to that stage.
Yeah, no, for sure. It's definitely an exciting day when it's launched. And my problem is like I have problems selling my book because I just want to give people it. I'm like, yeah, just take it. Like if I could afford a million print copies, I'll just go around town handing it out, right? Just because I'm proud of it, I enjoy it, and like my end goal is not to make $1 million selling the book, right? And I think it's that's part of like my strategic goal is just maybe I can bring in another client for our agency, right? But it's really is like the personal satisfaction of creating it.
Yeah, you can try to do bulk sales, but sometimes it makes just as much sense to do bulk giveaways if your book relates to a business or a nonprofit where the book has an impact that drives the readers to engage in a way that you want them to engage. But you can try to partner with an organization, or if you're going to events or doing any kind of speaking, or there's just an organization that complements what you do. In a way, sometimes you can give your book away to them in bulk in some way. And if your book is effective, sometimes that can create a certain level of organic sales if people are recommending your book and it's working like that.
That makes sense. So just kind of like jumping back to the actual writing process. So when it comes to storytelling, do you have like a magic formula? So like you have your 10 steps for the process of going through creating a book. Do you have kind of like a formula for what makes a good story?
I would say I'm a student of storytelling more than a teacher of storytelling. But the power of stories is that we're hardwired for stories, and it taps into our emotions. It makes it more memorable what you're saying, and it can frame an issue or a topic. It can frame the meaning of a story. It can frame how people think about a topic. So stories can be very powerful, but a story structure, you can have long stories, but one of the types of stories that I think is quite useful is one that's like a 2-minute story or a 3-minute story. And a structure might be something like a relatable character. So you set the scene by referring to a time and place with certain people. And that can be done in a single sentence. It was 2 years ago, and we were working with an author who had been a 10-year-old when he was removed from his village and became a child soldier. And so I've just set, it was 2 years ago, we were working with this author who had been removed from his home as a 10-year-old, and that's his story. So a relatable character, you can try to give details, some action, some what are they thinking, what are they feeling, what are you thinking? So a relatable character that triggers sympathy or empathy, or people can relate to in some way. And then there's some kind of challenge or obstacle or that they have to overcome, and then there's a resolution. That's the simplest version of a story, is a character that people can relate to, who has feelings, thoughts, goals. They encounter some form of challenge or obstacle, and then they overcome that, and there's a resolution of some sort. And then there's often a lesson in that. And as the storyteller, you sometimes have to unpack the lesson, or you might ask questions. That's a very simple version. There's slightly different structures that have, a hero's journey, for example. You might have a relatable character in a setting, and then they have an opportunity to take on a challenge, but they turn it down because they feel they're not ready yet. But then a guide comes along, and maybe that guide encourages them to take on the challenge. Then they have a series of obstacles they have to overcome, and then there's a resolution and a transformation of some sort. So the character can have a internal transformation where they learn something new or they experience things in a new way. So those are some of the pieces of storytelling, but I think the delivery of it to make it engaging is something that takes practice. So start simple, study it, go on YouTube, read books about storytelling. And again, this is storytelling, not writing a fiction book, which is a form of storytelling. But then just say you're promoting a nonfiction book on a topic and you're doing a 30-minute interview, you want to have, when someone asks you a question about a certain topic, you want to have a little story you can tell that actually captures people's attention. They focus, they stop spacing off. And so that's where you just set the stage about some action, some character. And usually there's two types of stories. One is your own story that you need to tell, and then the other can be stories of examples of the topic you're talking about.
Yeah, I watched. I was watching an interview not too long ago. It was an author. And he said what he would do is he would be at like the dinner table with 10 friends, and he would just say a story, not telling them that it was for a book he's working on, and just kind of see the reaction. Right? If people were interested, engaged, asked questions, or they were just falling asleep. And I thought it was kind of an interesting idea, right? Because if you tell someone what do you think of this idea, it kind of, you give them the context, right? But if you just tell a story, see how they react, and you're like, okay, well, this is actually going to be for the book I'm working on. It's kind of,
it's a skill though. It's a skill to all of a sudden switch to like the present tense, or like refer to a time period and then talk in the present tense, describe sights and sounds, describe feelings. And to do that, that's not a long rambling, blah, blah, blah. There's certainly an art to it. So, but these stories can be little nuggets within a book. So say you're writing, you've got 7 chapters, 7 different topics. Sometimes with a nonprofit, it could be like, what's the problem, solutions, and then action. It could be 3 parts to a book. And you start with like, what's the topic, the issue, the challenge, and then you give some success stories. And then and this is just one example. Or you can, if it's more of a empowerment with knowledge, how-to book, you might have the 7 steps or the 7 lessons or the 7 laws, but you have the substance. But then for each chapter, you might have one story that you embed in the story that makes the book more engaging. But then those stories in the book also become the little stories that you can tell in a podcast interview. And so you practice them. They have power in presentations, in speaking, and as a way to answer questions in interviews. But then they also can be, you can actually gather those stories and collect them in the process of writing a book, and you layer them throughout your book to illustrate concepts.
No, that makes sense. So, Tim, I got one final thing I do at the end of every interview. So I've asked ChatGPT to give me a question to ask you. And I got 3. I actually got, usually ChatGPT just gives me a bunch of nonsense, but I got 3 really good ones. I'm going to ask the second one because I find it the most interesting. So the question for you from ChatGPT is, you worked with a wide array of creative professionals from authors to graphic artists. Can you share a particularly memorable collaboration that highlighted the magic of bringing a book to life?
There's so many amazing stories of authors we worked with, and often they form really powerful relationships with our staff as well as we're working on their books. One book that comes to mind, there's so many, we've worked with 4,000 authors, but one book that relates to a nonprofit, Heather Stuka, she actually had her story is sad in that she received a text message one day that changed her life. And basically her 20-year-old son, who'd gone off to work at a ski resort, had not showed up for work. And so they raced up there to address the situation. There was emergency crews. They helped out in a search, but after a day or 2, they finished their search and they had no luck. And so she found herself in this position as a family where, with a missing person, where she didn't know what to do. There was no guidance from there. So they organized their own search efforts. She built her own social media campaign, and she wrote a book in honor of her son. That was, she says, the hardest part of writing it is trying to, you know, do justice to her son who disappeared. But she turned that loss and that grief into something that involves helping other people. And so she actually launched a nonprofit called the Free Bird Project. And it's basically, when you find yourself in this horrible position, there's not really any guidance for people. So having gone through that with her family, and she basically realized that no, people who find themselves with a missing person, they don't know where to go. So they built this nonprofit that actually helps people in that situation. Like, how do you organize a campaign? How do you create awareness? How do you create a search? So that's one example of a very special author with a very difficult story, but where she took the grief that she went to and has tried to turn it into something that involves helping a lot of other people. So launching a nonprofit and building resources for people with a family member who goes missing. So I know her book touched a lot of people in our employees and staff, and you know, it's great to see her helping other people in such a way.
Even you just saying that, you know, like I feel like impacted, right? Like I feel like the emotional appeal, like I'm like, you know, like cancel the rest of my day, like I don't want to work anymore, you know, like especially like, you know, like having a son, right? And then, you know, you envision what if that happened, right? And like, you know, how devastating. So you imagining how hard it would be for her, and then, you know, the impact that you can see of like her doing this, which is, you know, is really challenging for her, to help others, you know, that are going to be going through a really challenging time. Which, yes, you know, I think it's just incredible just to be part of that.
Absolutely.
Well, it's a really tough note to end, but Tim, I really appreciate your time, all your tips and tricks, and definitely let me know once your book is published, because I definitely would like to come back to the show notes and, you know, put that in as a link to it, because I think, you know, it sounds like there's gonna be a lot of really good information, especially for someone that, you know, wants to get in, and there's a lot of steps. It can be overwhelming. You know, I think people think, okay, well, how hard can it be? I'm just gonna, you know, write some words on a piece of paper. Right. But then I feel like where you said people get stuck at the beginning is just realizing, oh my God, there's so much that actually has to get done, that actually goes into doing it, you know, in a professional manner. Right.
Yes. It's one of the new pieces we're working on, is a simple course on just how to plan a book. So it demystifies it, creates more clarity on the steps involved. Tellwellpublishing.com is our website. So you can always book a free call and we can answer questions.
Perfect. Well, I appreciate it so much, Tim. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you for having me, Patrick.